tonight's Wilbury live stream. We are gifted with Marcel's presence this evening, and we're going to talk about some Shakespeare tonight. Couple quick announcements before we begin. If you are enjoying these live streams, we urge everyone to go to Wilbury or the wilburygroup.org/support and pay what you can or drop a small donation. We'd appreciate it. And a huge shout out to Go Local Prov, who is who's embedding these live streams directly on their website and being wonderfully supportive during this whole thing. So, without much ado, I'm going to hand it off to Marcel, and Marcel, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I can't actually see how many people are live, but yeah. So why am I doing this? Why chill, chill out Shakespeare or Shakespeare? Can't even fucking say it right now. That'll be the last and first curse word I'll say. Um, First of all, it's description, this title, but it's also a command. It's chill out about your expectations about Shakespeare, and it's also let's be chill about how we approach performing Shakespeare. I wanted to do this with the Wilbury more than anything because as as an actor, first off, as an assistant coach, assistant director, co-director, and teacher, I've been noticing that a lot of times when I get a student that wants to do Shakespeare or has to do a Shakespeare monologue or a scene, for example, there's this voice oftentimes, or this block, they're not themselves anymore. They put on a voice or get really stiff or get really fidgety, or something that enables them to attack the speech the way they would any other speech. Another word besides attack is how to handle that speech, right? Because I also want to talk about performance versus invitation in Shakespeare. So I feel like a lot of times these expectations come from these ideas of first Shakespeare being classical, right? Shakespeare being only for white folks or white Americans or British people. Shakespeare sounds best in a British accent because maybe those are the dames and sirs that you heard delivered your favorite Shakespeare. I don't blame you because I love some of those actors too, but they're being themselves oftentimes, or they're doing a very specific shape and losing themselves into that shape being their voice, their diction, their accent, either being RP or Mid-Atlantic in the US, particularly in the 60s, with people like Katharine Hepburn and Betty Davis, who Katharine Hepburn did Shakespeare. I don't know about Betty Davis, maybe. And so weird with a thing. And so I wanted to share some of my own journeys with those questions, with those insecurities, with those expectations of Shakespeare. So we're going to start macro and talk about it on a macro level, and then get a bit more specific about technical. And in the last half hour of this, I'll either ask for some volunteers, if there are any that are willing, please let Max know right now. Or throughout. Also, any questions if you want me to get even more specific, because this is a first time virtual thing. So bear with me, we're still figuring it out. But in the very end, I'll be doing some performance snippets to just get more specific about what we're talking about now. So I talk about chill out Shakespeare. Why would I say that? People seem to be very afraid. Why are people afraid? As I said, because of their expectations of the greats before them, right? I feel like a lot of us students, I know I was in high school, I went to performing arts high school, and I was terrified. My first Shakespeare teacher was Andrew Noble, a very, 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 very nice British gentleman who spoke Shakespeare and phrased it flawlessly without putting too much airs. And I was terrified because after having him as the first teacher, I thought that was the perfect way to sound. And so I studied Anthony Hopkins, Judi Dench, Laurence Olivier even back in the day, and I created this kind of like fake Shakespeare voice. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis noble in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows. That was me trying to do Shakespeare at 16, and it's not real for me, you know, a little Cuban immigrant kid. And it wasn't until I had a teacher by the name of James Randolph in high school, which was like, what are you doing? You know, like, use your own voice. And then started my second journey, which is like, yes, use your own voice, but have clarity and really chew your words. Chew your words or really articulate or have fun, right? So this title is also a command to yourself. Chill out about Shakespeare. When, if you're like me, or like how I was back in high school and even early days of college and undergrad, still really obsessing about what's the perfect way or what's the most ingenious way. Like, can I make Shakespeare sound like something else? No, it's really about being yourself first, right? Being clear second. And how do we be clear and why do we need to be clear? Because we have to understand that Shakespeare originally, and this is where people might get a little intimidated, but we're people that preach a pure way or a classical way of doing Shakespeare. They're talking about giving importance to the word. They're talking about Shakespeare, when it was originally performed, as far as we know, was meant to be heard more than seen, right? Was meant to be for very few people could see Shakespearean plays. The people that could were usually upper middle class, some of them merchant class, obviously, because it was not really a middle class, and the rich, right? That everyone else, which was the majority of the people enjoying and focusing Shakespeare when it went well, or other Elizabethan plays of the era, could only see it. Could only hear it. Could only hear the play. And so I think a lot of people get really hung up on that because many of us, including myself, are very physical people. And if you were exposed to a lot of British folks in particular, but old Shakespearean American films, there is a certain accent or diction that sounds really good on them because that's what they've practiced, who they are and who they've come from. But if you look at people like Raul Julia, who also did a lot of very intense diction training, dropped a lot of that and said, you know what, I'm going to be clear. If you don't know who Raul Julia is, look him up. He's a Broadway star, but also a film star and just a great, not just a star, a craftsman, really. And what Raul Julia did for Shakespeare is that he wasn't afraid of his accent, his Puerto Rican accent, which he had learned to really almost get rid of. He molded that with like, oh, I need to be clear. I can be myself, you know, whether that's whatever self I choose to be. And we'll talk about character in Shakespeare later and how to still be yourself and do another character or at another video. And how to, it's so weird when you don't have someone to play off to. And how to, nervous. So last thing I said, Max, you want to come back in for a second? Make this a conversation. Because I was talking about a lot of things, so I just need a little bit of centering real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
Last thing I mentioned was...
Good question. I'm like putting out the word to see if anyone wants to join in. Sorry, I missed that.
Right, is it just us right now, or do we have anyone?
It's just us right now. We got let's see, we got I think about
recording
8. We got like 8 to 10 people watching on Facebook.
Great.
So Robert Marcella just shot you some fire. So thanks, Robert.
So thank you, Robert. So the last thing that I mentioned was, or that I remember mentioning, is expectations and something meaning to be heard. Sorry, there's a lot of people going in and sounds. Now, as important as Shakespeare is in terms of being heard, that doesn't mean we cannot be physical. What that means is that the physicality needs to come from the word, right? So the word to the action to the word, as Speak the Speech says.
I love that one. That's a great one to bring up.
I have it actually ready if we want to touch upon it later because it really, actually, maybe we should just intro with that real quick and
Why
keep the
not?
conversation going.
Yeah.
Um,
I think if why don't we, and for anyone who's listening, that's Hamlet's speech to the players.
Yes, that's Hamlet's, which is, and I want to talk a little bit about this because as much as you need to chill out about Shakespeare, you also need to educate yourself and you need to know the circumstances of the story. What's so curious about this monologue is that, just to set up the scene for you, is that Hamlet has, before this moment, already made the decision to, let me just find it, to to test whether the fact his uncle killed his father or their father, because Hamlet could be not non-binary, like me, but and has figured out, wow, I can maybe like structure this play, give it to these really good actors, and and thus what actually happens in the play, my uncle will confess. However, what's really curious about it is that a lot of people take this monologue and think that Hamlet is telling them how to act because they think they're bad actors, which is wrong because there's another monologue before this that is in response to one of the captain player's monologues. This gets cut a lot, where this player expresses so much honest empathy for this loss of Hecuba. He's recreating Hecuba's death, for example. I just saw Hamlet recently at the Globe, so it's fresh in my mind. Virtually, by the way, they have it. So catch it, it's a real treat. And Hamlet has a monologue being like, why can't I emote this much, blah, blah, blah. And through that monologue actually conceives of the idea of, oh, the play's the thing in which I'll catch the conscience of the king, right? And then I believe that this monologue, rather than coming, like, let's put it in context, even though a lot of people take it out of context as a great lesson to actors, because historians also believe that he was writing about a clown that was kind of taking too much attention in some of his plays or in other theater plays. But within the context of the story of Romeo, he's really nervous. Everyone's going to watch this fucking show. Everyone is going to see it, and he doesn't know, most importantly, if this plan will work. Right? So I've set that up. Let's play, and then we'll talk about it real quick, if I can find it. Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of our players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Nor do not solve the air too much with your hand thus, but use all gently and forgive the ringtones and other distractions. So, but if you mouth it, as many of our players do, I'm going to start that again because there's no way to ignore that
I love
happened.
that. You just like seamlessly brought that right in there. That was beautiful.
Tried to.
Hey, who says even though
Yeah,
we're digital, theater can't be live and dangerous?
right. So let's do that again. Um, but if you mouth it, as many of our players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Nor do not saw the air too much with your hand thus. Use all gently. For in the very torrent, tempest, and, as I may say, whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustruous, periwig-pated fellow tear passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings who, for the most part, are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I would have such a fellow whipped for o'erdoing termagant without Herod's Herod. Pray you avoid it. So that's just like half of it, right? And here we give me 1 second. I'm sorry, give me 1 second, Max.
So while Marcel's taking a second, again, if you want to join in and participate, feel free to drop a comment in the chat, and I'll send you a message with a Zoom link, and you can participate. I think we got one so far, which is exciting. We're going to see how this works. This isn't something that we've done before, but why not? Right? This is the era of experimentation and Zoom and all that kind of wonderful stuff. So one of the things, I love that speech too. I think I had an old director who would use that speech as an example for anyone looking for acting lessons. Go to Shakespeare. He talks about sawing the air and too many motions with your hands and overdoing things. In addition to it being just like a wonderful speech and a wonderful plot point, he also talks a lot about that kind of stuff. But I'll let Marcel elaborate a little bit more. So while we're paused, I do want to say, oh, okay, great.
Say it.
Take it away. I was just going to say, I hope everyone's doing good. Right now, I know this is like weird, tough times, and everyone's a little on edge, and we're trying to figure out how this is all going to pan out. But I think it's coming together in moments like this around art that really brings people together. So,
yeah, sorry about it. There was some family stuff that needed to be dealt with immediately.
It's all good. All our workplaces are now at home, so we're learning a lot about each other, I think.
Right. Just my grandfather making sure he's okay.
Good.
Not affected or anything or in contact, but just like the new information that was very vital. But anyway, to not get personal. So let's first talk about something that came up for me just in that monologue, which again is more of a reading, less of a performance, trying to work on this inviting thing, you know? So even that at an audition, you know, can be okay. I was admittedly a little distracted. But one thing that came out automatically is we have to talk, particularly when doing monologues, about the difference between prose and verse and how to attack those differences. You may or may not have noticed, but because of the freeness of the rhythm in which I performed that monologue in, distractions and all, were due to the fact that it is in prose, and thus that doesn't mean casual or take your time as much as you would like in a regular, like that doesn't mean like 6-second beats or pauses, right? But that does mean pay attention to the grammar, but also pay attention to your own imagination and what you're receiving from the words, right? In terms of technicalities, we can get in our heads and not become chill about differences that some scholars have brought up in the past, such as Shakespeare uses verse for tragedy and rich people or upper class, and prose is the structure of the poor or comedy. But then you'll also see Shakespeare contradict himself all the time. A great example is Phoebe from As You Like It, who's supposed to be a shepherdess, and some people play her as quite dumb, whatever that means. And one of her most iconic monologues, when she falls in love with Rosalind, or is rather wrestling with whether or not she's falling in love, and then kind of does, comes right at, is written in verse. And she's supposed to be a shepherd of the lowest of the class, I think, in that era, right? And how you play that now in modern depends, oh, I have notes, I forgot I wrote so many notes. Depends on a classical take, setting it in the Elizabethan era, which many British productions do. A modern take, which can be using the classical text, cutting it a little bit perhaps, and putting it in both Elizabethan and whatever kind of spin you're trying to put on the play. And by spin, I don't necessarily mean changing it, but like what thematic elements in terms of design, for example, because I guess I'm also speaking from a director's point of view and not just an actor. And a lot of times that lives in another universe. As a director brain on real quick, I think it's very important for you to get specific about that universe, even if the specificity is we're going to keep true to the language, but set it in 1920s to 1930s New Orleans, which is a great trace that I saw from a teacher of mine, actually, Susan Purchase, who set Twelfth Night in the middle of Mardi Gras in 1930s New Orleans. And Vestes was the singer with the sun kind of hat, and one of the earliest blues and jazz singers. And so that really works well because it's within the spirit of it, right? So we were speaking about verse versus prose, what classics think. What I think verse and what my teachers have taught me to think throughout the years is that verse, the way he writes his verse, which is, people would argue, mostly iambic pentameter very early in his work, but of course, as it grows, he throws in a lot of his, even in the beginning, a lot of his verse begins with trochee. If you don't know what that means, let me fast forward. Let me know if I'm going too fast for people, Max. It helps that you're here a lot to have another person.
Glad to help.
Yeah. I am is exactly as the thing says. I am. So it's unstressed, stressed. Stress being how much more emphasis I'm putting on a vowel. I'm sorry, on a syllable, right? Iambic pentameter means 5 of those 2 combinations, right? So every combination is a metric foot. Unstressed, stressed 5 times. However, and bear with me if you're already getting confused, because I just want you can have it recorded. However, and you could also look this up yourself, a lot of, even in his early work, Romeo and Juliet is a great example of this, a lot of the first meter will be trochaic, which is just like the word means. Tro-key, more stress on tro than key, right? I am. Tro-key, I am. Tro-key, I am, right? So tro-key, stress comes first. I am, stress comes second. The other exception is that in the last foot, oftentimes you'll get 3 syllables. So don't get scared if it doesn't scan. Now, for those that do not get this, do not want to get this, are scared of it, math freaks them out, it's too much. In most verse monologues, sonnets, and soliloquies, the rule of stressing 3 minimum will save you always at max 5. Very few times in a line will there be more than 5 words stressed. And what I mean by 5 words or 3 words stressed, that means those 3 to 5 words will be the most important thing in your line, right? And in a verse line, you usually have 5 metric feet, right? So for example, the classic and boring one, to be or not to be, that is the question, right? Now, you can argue, some people have fucked with that, like to be or not to be, as Captain Kirk did it once. That is the question, which people have made fun of. That can save you with to be or not being question, right? And that to me is 4. You can do 5 and count is in there, to be or not to be. That is the question. I changed it and I put an emphasis on that, you know? And that's the thing, you can play. There is no right or wrong. There's only what fits best the story that you and your director are trying to say. I know that's a very unshow way of saying, but it's a way to really be strict with yourself about how free you can be, right? And always know that before all these technicalities, what is your job mostly as an actor and even as a director is to tell a clear and concise story and to let the words speak for themselves. And that includes in bringing your physical body to it. It's very hard to bring your physical body to it naturally to a text if you do not have that text, whether it be Shakespeare or any other tricky, complicated, or poetic text, without it being really in your bones. If you don't have control of those words, what you'll come up with will be physicality to help you say the words. And that's not the same thing, right? So we spoke about verse. which led us into speak about performance a little bit, right? And I want to invite us that within being heard, it's like when I'm first working on any piece of text, but particularly Shakespeare, before I add any objective, any point of view, which almost comes naturally or kind of should if you're free enough, or any obstacles, all things that every actor should add on top of your tactics and all that stuff, I try, my objective is clarity. Do I understand what I am saying? Do I think others will understand what I am saying? So speak the speech. I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. You know, even if that's your exploration with whatever you're working with. But if you mouth it, as many of our players do, I had as Leaf, which is I would prefer, I had as Leaf, the town crier, spoke my lines. Do not, you know, even if a stutter comes, play with it to see what it gives you, so then you can do it again without that little stutter, right? So fun is very important. Clarity is very important. I want to say one is more important than the other. They're both the same. You should not sacrifice your clarity for fun. If you're not getting something, because it is hard. And some of, you know, and by hard, I mean there's a monologue, like there's many, but the one that comes to my mind, these are the forgeries of jealousy. And never since the middle summer spring met we on dale, hill, forest, or mead, Titania's monologue. She has around 8 to 9 lines that are actually one whole sentence. One whole sentence. So you'll have a monologue that really might only have 3 sentences, but it's around 12 to 18 lines long. So that can be difficult. At that point, clarity should be your priority. And once you're getting that clarity, add the fun in. If you can't find the clarity, bring the fun in. But never sacrifice one for the other, right? I wonder if I should give some examples of this with other things.
Yeah, go for it.
Should we do a new one?
Yeah, let's try a new one.
Let's switch reins a little bit and do sonnets. That to me, actually, I've done sonnets as monologues when people are asking for a shorter audition. And actually, I don't need to read this one. I can just look at you, Max, and look at the camera.
Well, you were talking actually, before we started this, you were talking a little bit about how, about auditions too. And you just kind of mentioned this a little bit about you being able to use sonnets
Right.
as good little excerpts and having, like, not having to understand an entire story arc and balancing character objectives and everything. Could you talk about, like, after, you know, we're going to do a sonnet right now, but like also would you advise that people use those as when someone asks for a Shakespearean monologue about going in and finding a nice sonnet?
You know, I think it depends. I think primarily it's about how much time you have. You know, if you're asked to show 2 pieces, and it's about time and context, right? And so if you're about to do 2 pieces, if you're asked to do 2 pieces, but they ask you a minute and a half, which is the shortest that I've seen for some, you know, I've oftentimes have used, if it has to be contemporary and one of them classical, I've used contemporary one that's a little longer and shows a bit more, not of range, but a bit more of a specific thing, whatever that thing is, whether it's more comedy or serious. And then I'll bring in like a sonnet, or I've done it also a contemporary poem. I'll bring in a sonnet that I feel comfortable enough to put context to it, right? Because these things, they're taught as if they're written in a vacuum, and they are written separate from a story, but we have to understand that they were written oftentimes for people he loved, or for people, or for business, like a fucking postcard. And so sometimes it's harder to make those come to life, but they're still written with certain ironies, certain circumstances that you can gleam into. And one that's very close to my heart, it's a little, I might have to pull it up just in case to not butcher it, but I'll look at the camera, is Sonnet 29, very famous overdone sonnet. First introduced to me when I was like, what, 21, and I haven't let go. Because when I have been so sad, it's helped me a lot. Anyway, I'll talk more about that, and I'll just jump in. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him, like Max with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy, contented least, yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee. And then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love, remembered, such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. And so, like, admittedly, not to judge one's own performance, because that's also dangerous. Thank you, Max. Admittedly, that's a little bit of the performative side, right? If I was working on myself, but I'm still feeling it out. I'm having fun. I'm working on some real sadness. I'm seeing the person I'm talking to somewhat. I could have saw them a little better, but those are the things I'm working on. And so my point with that is, do the text for clarity, but then when you have it in your bones like I do, let go, not let go, trust that you've done all that work and that work will be there, and add your point of view, add who you're talking to, add your grandmother, because I've seen that sonnet oftentimes be about love, and it is about love, but I've seen it about romantic love. And for me, it's a different kind of love. It's the love of a lost one, with which it's difficult to think of this now because of everything that's going on. So if anyone is currently grieving, my love and heart for you right now, and I truly sincerely mean it. But that sonnet to me is about grieving as much as it is about love. So let that come too. And, particularly if you're auditioning for people that know you, like the Wilbury knows me, add Max's name in. Don't do that if you don't know the theater. Don't do that if you don't know a call audition. Or
I would agree with that. Yeah, no.
Right. Or a college audition. Don't. I don't like to be so binary or absolutist about things, but just don't do it. I'm doing it to Max because it's silly and I wanted to make a joke. But that's part of having fun, right? When you're working on this by yourself, if part of the process of getting into your bones with the text or reaching that clarity, or that thing, clarity versus fun that we were talking about, play with that and do not be afraid to fail, because when you hear yourself going over the top, you'll be like, I can bring it in. I can be more inviting. I could be more simple. I can be, when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state. And that doesn't have to be casual, because it's a camera and I'm just telling you my thought. So, right.
And that trust is really important, particularly nowadays, right? Because we don't necessarily have anyone to play off of.
Right.
Like, it would be one thing if, like, I know one of the things I remember after, was it after Prudencia, you got together with one of our students, Arturo, and you were going over audition monologues? It's not like we can do that right now.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to. A lot of this is an exercise in self-confidence, and like.
Also, if anyone wants a coach out there, I'll do virtual coaching. Let me know. Talk. But that's a great thing, because that actually brings me into, let's talk about performance, but let's also talk about the differences of sonnets, monologues, and soliloquies, right? So sonnets, as I just said, usually kind of more like a postcard or a poem, usually said to a lover, but not always. And some, I think, and I believe others will agree with me, are open to interpretations, right? with the exception of soliloquies, but even so, and I'll get to that in a second, sonnets and monologues, I believe, should be performed to a person. Even if you're at an audition and you can't look at someone's eyes, make someone up, create someone, as you've probably heard one say. If that really scares you, don't. Know that if that kind of sense memory is too much for you, you can look at a point. Can I curse, Max? Yeah. Okay. You can look at a fucking point on the wall, because that's how I feel about it, and just think about your grandmother's eyes. You know, I'm talking about myself in the circumstance of Sonnet 29, what I just did. You don't have to recreate your grandma. You can just like imagine you're talking to her, and if you can only see her eyes, just see her eyes, you know. Or just look at the point of the wall and think about your grandmother. But and trust that if that's the choice that you made, it's because you're comfortable doing that. Always do something that you're comfortable with. But try to say it to people, even if you have to recreate another version of yourself to say it to. Which leads me to soliloquies, right? So monologues are usually, and when we're talking about Shakespearean monologues, although some people use the term loosely, it's a monologue within a scene. So it's a speech to another character, really. A soliloquy, and that includes, I think, asides, right? Soliloquy, you can argue that are just asides, right? And I've heard that. You can argue that soliloquies are just meant to be the character working something out. I have heard teachers argue that every single soliloquy, even if it's the ones that are working things out most, right, in the monologue to get to some sort of conclusion, should be directed to the audience. Now, you'll have some directors that might disagree with that. And if you're in a film, that might be virtually impossible, right? And so that's where these rules change a little bit. You know, we're talking about the theater, but, you know, in a soliloquy, although Kenneth Branagh plays with this a lot in his Shakespeare movies, well, he'll talk directly to the fucking camera in a soliloquy. Or you have choices. You can split the ground, you know, I'm working it out in my head, and then I'm asking you, what the fuck do I want, right? And some are both. And what do I mean by that? Some are soliloquies that are really monologues in disguise. And we'll see one real fast because it's short. This one's also in prose, though, not verse. If I should do verse, Max, later, let me know. But Bottom has just gotten finished being toyed with. I'm gonna do this one for clarity and a little bit of fun, so I won't add a lot of donkey noises and stuff. But for context, Bottom is the trip is over with, right? And because of Oberon and Puck's spell and Puck's deviousness, Titania was meant to fall in love with Bottom after Bottom was transformed into quite literally a donkey, an ass. And this, I was terrified of this piece in undergrad. It's a bit of a cold reading, but I don't know what I've run before. But let's attack it from just clarity with a little bit of fun if it helps our clarity, right? And I'll speak more again what I mean of like this being a monologue in disguise. So Bottom has just been played with by the fairies and left where they found him asleep. Pretend that I have a big donkey head. When my cue comes, call me, and I will answer. My next is most fair Pyramus. Hey ho! Peter Quaid? Blue, the bellows mender. Snout, the tinker. Starveling. Gods, my life stolen hence and left me asleep? I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Man is but an ass if he go about to expound this dream. Methought I was. There's no man can tell what methought I was, and methought I had. But man is but a patched fool if he will offer to say what methought I had. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was. I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of this dream. It shall be called Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom, and I will sing it in the latter end of a play before the Duke. Peradventure. No, see, let's go back. And I will sing it in the latter end of a play before the Duke. Peradventure, new thought, right? To make it the more gracious, I shall sing it at her death. Right? And so that's a really fucking tricky monologue, but and I kind of lied a little bit. I like tried to do more for clarity, and I ended up sacrificing my clarity for fun a little bit. But there we see what I mean by like it's a soliloquy, but it's still a scene, right? Because what happens, and that takes a little bit of analysis to be able to come up with that, right? But that the only stage direction Shakespeare gives us is he wakes up. So some actors have played with that and have changed it a little bit, that he's still sleeping, and there's been some brilliant choices that brilliant actors have made of like how much is he still asleep, how exactly is he waking up, those levels that you can play so much more with, that I kind of, you know, just made the choice of like, I'm waking up and this is me waking up, and then realizing I'm alone, right? And it's prose, so we can take as much time as we deem to, or as our director wants us. If you're at an audition, you know, it's like speak the speech. You don't want to be too fast, and you don't want to be too slow either. You want to go at the pace that you are comfortable with. A great high school teacher of mine, the one I mentioned earlier, James Randolph, always said, go at the speed of fun. And what's the speed of fun? You have to find that, right? So you can start slow. It's a lot about doing work. So you got to chill out, but you got to work hard, right? So you have to do the work of getting it in your bones. And so if you need to go slower, you can go slower. Should I do it again, Max, to show what that would be? Or are we on time? Should we move on?
I think we understand what you
Yeah,
mean.
we
But
understand.
I do love that phrase, the speed of fun. That is cool.
The speed of fun. And you know, another phrase to remind yourself that is very important in verse, but also important in prose. A lot of people in acting will know what I'm talking about when they say, you know, end up with an upward inflection, right? And that I know confuses a lot of young actors. I know it confused me because it makes you think that the line has to be or not to be. That is the question, right? And no, it's not so much that, right? Or monologue I'm much more comfortable with. No matter where of comfort no man speak. Let's talk of graves, of worms and epitaphs, which is the second line. And in those, I'm not, you know, I'm not going, no matter where of comfort no man speak. I could, but you know, you don't have to do that much. You just can't go no matter where of no man speak, unless you have a great microphone and a camera that's going in at you. But why? Because that dissipates the energy. Particularly in verse, it dissipates the energy of the rhythm. I said ribbon. The energy of the rhythm. So that monologue, soliloquies, you're in a scene, but you're also going through it. You're playing with, you're trying to work it out. You're talking to yourself. I would always say that if the director allows you, unless you have a strict fourth wall policy, or you're on a camera, but even then, make the audience your head. If a director says you're only working it out, ask them, can I make the audience my brain cells? Can I bring them inside my head? And that's part of the inviting part of Shakespeare.
I like that, making the audience your brain cells. That's a good phrase.
Yeah.
The and you also
Any
talked about like
questions
the
here that are coming in, let me know, Max.
Oh yeah, so I don't think anyone's. I'm not seeing anyone. I don't think Roberta took us up on the offer to join, but that's okay. So, but we have like we're at like 45 minutes, which is great.
Oh,
So we're covering a lot, I think.
yeah,
Um, you also talked about like using the camera as your brain as like your processing center.
right,
I think that's really valuable nowadays.
yeah.
We're going to be
Um,
doing that for a while, I think.
right, right. And how to, and like, so like, let's do verse real quick and
Yeah.
not do, we'll do a semi-serious monologue that I have, and I won't do all of it, because I really like my tragedies, as you can tell. Actually, let's do fucking Phoebe. I know, no, I already did a little bit of Phoebe. Let's do, yeah, let's do a little bit of Titania, not Titania,
Yeah.
Tamara from Titus Andronicus,
Okay.
where this is a very iconic and overdone monologue, so forgive me. Um, and it's, if you don't know who Tamara is, Titus Andronicus, basically she's one of the most important female villains of all time, one of my favorite characters. And basically, in the beginning of the play, she pleads for the General Titus, who's the lead of the play, to spare her two sons. He does not, and she becomes a prisoner. However, through a turn of events, political turn of events, she ends up, after she's delivered as a prisoner and a slave to the emperor, there's a new emperor that comes in, falls in love with her aesthetic beauty, and deems her right then and there empress. So she goes, "Oh, you didn't pay attention to me? Well, now I will be revenged." And a lot of the play is, where does your allegiance lie, which is kind of the tragic fault of Titus, that he's loyal to a fault and quite literally loses his whole family because of it, and it drives him mad, or drives him mad with vengeance, right? Which is kind of what also happens to Tamara, but is not told from her point of view. She's used more as the setup. So without further ado, in this thing, she has just like, she's, you know what? I'm not going to explain it too much. I'll explain it after. Just know that there are two people that she's trying to set up, and her sons, who are loyal to her, just came in. So she is putting on airs, so to speak, and about to say something really nasty about these two other people who aren't her son. One of them is the daughter of Titus, who is married to the other guy who was almost emperor. And her sons have just come in. Oh, sorry. We're going to play Max. We're going to follow Max's advice and use the camera. Just so you know, I'm going to put the people here and the people I really want to talk to, my sons, are going to be you, the audience, the camera, right? Have I not reason, think you, to look pale? These two have enticed me hither to this place, a barren, detested vale, you see it is. The trees, though summer, yet forlorn and lean. Here never shines the sun, unless the nightly owl or fatal raven. Right? I'm going to stop there because I just went up on my line and I'm not looking at the script. But like, why did I switch there on that description of how horrible this place is? Because there's 3 lines where she really gets into that description, which could lead you to believe that while she's trying to sell this to her son, she knows her sons are going to help her kill all these people. She's spoken about it already. And her lover, Aaron the Moor, which is the actual name of the character, is also in leagues with this. So in a way, the actor has a choice, as I made the choice, to use the creepy description of this forest that they're in, because it's quite literal. Shakespeare is telling us where we are, to kind of scare them. And she goes and does this even more so, right? So yeah. I'm just going to do 3 lines of that again to show a little thing in terms of how to find clarity that just came back to me in terms of when we're speaking about clarity versus fun and how to never sacrifice for the other. let's talk about rhythm or speed for a second. In verse, you want to go at the speed of fun. What is that? It's the speed of understanding, of clarity, and also of not lagging, of not letting the energy sit behind, but of always not being on top of it, but of always being with it. It's almost like jazz, right? So you can extend a moment, but you better damn well extend it and bring it back and keep the energy and ball moving, right? There is an exercise, though, if you're going too fast and need to find yourself, need to find when you're going too slow, because it's better to know when you're going too slow than too fast, I think, particularly when you're trying to get this in your bones, and this is a very old school technique. You breathe in after each line, you breathe in before the line, you breathe in before each line. So it's I'm tired, so let me show you rather than tell you. And you can even do it before if you want to have a moment before, which I always coach people to, especially for auditions in colleges, to have a moment before. That has to do with the play, especially if the monologue is in a context of a scene, which all monologues are in Shakespeare. But have I not reason, think you, to look pale? These two have enticed me hither to this place. A barren, detested vale, you see it is. Right? So that's about rhythm. In order, also remembering, going back to Max's note about camera, to just speak a little bit to what I'm doing, what I did first and what I did now in just those two lines, is point of focus, right? So I'm choosing my son's, the camera, the lens is the point of focus. And if there are other characters in the play, where are the other focuses? The first time I put the two other people that I want to scare right next to each other. You might want to put one to your left and one to the right of the lens, and then go back and keep talking to your children, right? So that's about focus, and focus of the eyes is very important. Let's go back to voice and rhythm real quick, and then we're almost done because there's not much. I spoke about in verse, because a lot of the most tricky stuff is in verse. Prose, you should really attack it like any other play, really. Either way, you should attack it like any other play, but there's some little extra work you have to do with verse. If you're confused by I am, trochee, spondy, all the different beginnings and which one is right or which one Shakespeare's telling you, remember what I said. Choose either 3 to 5 words. Which words, you ask yourself? You might think, because in today's world that we speak, we put a lot of emphasis on nouns. In Shakespeare, it's not advisable. I won't say you should never, but it is not advisable to put nouns. After all the different teachers that I love, they have almost all said the same thing. But this is my own hierarchy of words in terms of Shakespeare. So verbs, number 1, most important, adverbs, adjectives, then nouns, right? Verb being what we do, adverb, I just know that it's not exactly a verb. It's not really an adjective. I don't, it's like people that can sing without reading sheet music. Like I know where they are, but I can't exactly teach you. Grammar's not my point of view. Adjective describing a noun, right? A person, place, or thing, and noun being a person, place, or thing. Now, use this with discretion, because there's a lot of things that get there's a lot of words is a perfect example. In Hamlet, there's a whole line, I think, that the whole meters are words. And the actor that just did in the Globe did something really amazingly modern and so correct and good in the world, where she words. Like she just like zoomed past it, words, and like that's something within your disposal. Or like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace, from day to day, till the last syllable. I'm playing a bit too much, right? That might be sacrificing a little bit of fun for clarity, but by all means, to like go into the text, to find that clarity creeps in this petty pace, from day to day till the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted proof death. That one's on top off the top of my head, so I can't quite remember all of it. Because as much as I love Shakespeare, believe it or not, I do not consider myself a classical purist or technical Shakespearean actor at all. As I wave the air with my hand, thus, I just have had the privilege of having a lot of education on it and just naturally liking words. And I've always wanted to sing, and Shakespeare to me proved the same complexity as singing, right?
I like that you're attributing singing to the poetry of the play. It's I think that's something that people can like latch on to a lot of the time. Is if you treat the play as if you were learning a song,
Right.
it'll anchor in your brain a little bit more.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
And that's, that's why in the details I put a lot of this versus thing, because it's constantly, I think for every performer, it's constant balance, right? Because I say be inviting, don't be performative. What do I mean by that? That doesn't mean you are performing, right? You are bringing life to words, trying to make sense of these words. You invite people. To me, the difference is performing is about how you feel, and inviting is about how you want to make someone feel. And that could be complicated because even when the character's feeling a lot, like Hamlet, it's about how they want to stop feeling, or or maybe they're trying to get to something or make someone feel something else. It's always a trap, even with characters especially with characters like Hamlet, Richard III, Othello, King Lear. They're going through stuff, yes, but what are you trying to make the other person feel with that stuff that you're going through, right? When you actually have to cry and sob and do all that shit, that blow, winds blow, how are you trying to make the audience feel rather than just being like that, stupid and clownish, even though there's honor in exploring that, right? Yeah.
It's trying to get that understanding. I think if people could realize that that's what we're trying to do every day in our lives too. I mean, isn't that what Facebook's about? You're like, let me share this thing so everyone understands where I'm coming from. It's like it's the same thing in a play, except the people you're trying to get to understand are the audience who's there watching you. Get them on your side, As we like kind of wrap this up, we talked about and you talked about like privilege, about like being educated about this, and having like a number of teachers and going through school and everything, and being lucky enough to learn about this kind of stuff. And I think we all have that story about that one teacher who was like, we're going to read this in class and we're going to understand it. And we're all going to, I know we had Mrs. Kidwell, and she made us all stand up and read Macbeth. And we read it like by ourselves. And then all of us stood in class and recited it. And we were like, oh, that's what it means.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about this before, about, sorry as I crack my knuckles into the microphone, it's ASMR, guys.
Yeah.
You talked a bit about before, about coming from like an immigrant background and like a non-binary background, and how Shakespeare is kind of, you can be so free and open about it. Can you talk about that and like your personal experience with it? Because I think like Shakespeare could be intimidating for people, but in actuality, it's one of the most free places that we can be in like traditional theater.
Yeah, and I think it holds value, particularly if you're willing to adapt it to. There's one of my favorite productions of Julius Caesar, which has gotten a lot of slack, a lot of mixed feelings. And I only saw the taped version. I didn't get to see it live, but they place Julius Caesar in West Nigeria, and kind of like what to my eyes seems like kind of like a Yoruba kind of setting, and with using some of those structures. and a lot of the accents are West African, and it most definitely affects the rhythm and highlights choices that you would think, oh, this might not work, and work brilliantly. And so I mentioned how Julia, which is an interesting one, because while he did in fact use his own natural Puerto Rican accent when he first came before acting school, he did also go through the training to get those toned endings and the clarity that allowed him to, be in Shakespeare in the part. But people didn't care of how that S was, as long as they made sure that it was some sort of an S. Not even that, as long as they knew what the hell he was saying. And he paid so much attention to the words. Some people might say he was very big, but in fact, I even also was critical of him when I was 20. And then just watching him again recently, just a year ago, I was like, oh wow, like the amount of truth and bigness without it being performative. Again, I repeat, he made me feel something, which is how I measure good performance. And so as an immigrant, not even an immigrant, like as because I came here 6.5, so I think I assimilated quite well and quickly. One of the breakthroughs I had with Shakespeare was I was in a class after high school before going to purchase. I went to another undergrad. That's not important, but we're working on doing accents, and we were asked, if you have a native accent, try doing Shakespeare in that and being clear. And I had done, I always like the tragedies, but 'tis torture and not heaven. Mercy is here where Juliet lives, and every cat and dog and little mouse, every unworthy little thing may look on her, but Romeo may not. Just doing like fucking playing around one night with them, and they're like, that is the most live. Her words, not mine. I disagree with her. We had a big argument where she was like, that is the most live I've ever heard Romeo and Juliet. And she was from Australia, which in my opinion also holds really strong fucking actors. We see them because they dominate a good 25% of the Hollywood market. But which but it's that's where I was like, oh wow, why was it so good? Because it fit the bigness. And people that try to do the RP that I was trying to do in high school, because I was looking at Anthony Hopkins and Titus the movie, come, Lavinia, look, thy foes are bound. Like, I can't even do it right, but doing that kind of great cadence, because he's Anthony Hopkins and it fits him. He's being himself. You can only be yourself, right? And even if you're doing character, that has to come from a part of you, from your imagination, that you relate to in some way, even if it has nothing to do with you. You have to have fun with it. You can't force the character on. But
That's cool.
Yeah, there was one last point that just escaped my head with that. Oh yeah, it just fits. A lot of times accents are a great way to really explore the possibility, the size that Shakespeare is asking you without necessarily falling into a performative idea trap. But also don't be afraid to overact it when you're rehearsing. It's a very contradicting workshop, y'all. Deal with it.
That's part of the fun of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the valuable things about like keeping Shakespeare chill. Like, even though it's big and it's important and it's such a huge foundation to what we do as theater artists, it's also something that these are universal stories. We don't have to put them on a pedestal. We've all, like, everyone knows that, the Lion King is based off of Shakespeare. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, exactly. It's all the same story. And if they are all in fact universal, then we all have to kind of relax a little and recognize them in ourselves.
Yeah. And for any teacher that tells you also, which, I value, and I think it's valid to think that Shakespeare, if you think Shakespeare is a genius. I personally don't, only because, like you said, these are stories that not only have been repeated now, but I do not believe, if anyone there is a scholar and historian, please prove me wrong and let me know in the links below, but I do not believe that any of Shakespeare's plays were stories that he invented solely.
Right.
Now, the nuances, the details and obstacles and circumstances and relationships, he invented. He used his imagination to take a story that was either Italian or Greek 500 years before his
Right.
existence, or there's even a little Lost One Act where Shakespeare wanted to create an homage to Cervantes. He did a play about Don Quixote. Apparently, it's
Okay.
never been found, but allegedly that's a thing. And so it shows how much of a populist he was. And it also was an era where writers did that. They drew their inspirations from legends, myths, stories that people told themselves
Right.
and others. That's why comedies are so hard to do sometimes, because some of these jokes, scholars have been arguing for centuries about their real meanings because
Yeah.
he probably got them from the docs, you know? Was a
Yeah,
place.
and we argue about jokes on Twitter from a decade ago. Could you even imagine arguing with a historian about Shakespeare from 500?
Yeah. So in terms of just going back to like whether it's queerness or ethnicity
Yeah.
or language or difference of language, or rhythm, I've known many people that have attached various of musical rhythms to different monologues with or without accents, whether that be salsa, merengue, R&B, which is a very broad term, but
Right.
and there's actually a great teacher and Shakespeare rap artist that does a lot of raps teaching Shakespeare and the anyway and
Yeah, I
how
love
that
that. Yeah, but
integrates
I don't know if you're referring to the same. My friend Marlon does that. He with a lot of local public schools. He has like a whole rap about Hamlet. It's awesome.
Oh,
It's
that's
so
so
cool.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big thing. Yeah, it's just a big thing in England. No, it's probably not the same guy. I know of a celebrity, but he's done a big organization to bring that
Yeah.
kind of education to public school systems. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Love that. But yeah, that brings it kind of back to like the lyrical and musical nature of this. It's something that everyone can identify with and kind of key into
yeah.
really well. So as we kind of wrap this up, any parting thoughts for folks? Any like final words of wisdom? As maybe if maybe people go out and if they're looking for something to do in quarantine, like any particular plays you would recommend, or any particular Shakespeare's that you think are like the key
Well,
ones that you like learned a lot from.
that's great. It's funny because it's different for everyone.
Right.
What I need to work on most on is the histories personally. Those are the ones I stayed a bit from more, even though I'm more comfortable with them than the comedies. Because they're just, in terms of understanding, sometimes they're like, whatever. But do your research. But first of all, you can only do one thing at a time, right? Thank you, Stephen Berenson. You can only do one thing at a time. So, depending on where your level is and comfort level with these classics, with these works of art, but also with these new plays, these modern plays, because they can also be modern plays, and a lot of adaptations will feel that way. Adaptations of Shakespeare will feel like something new. With any play, you can only do one thing at a time. And so, if your comfort level is not that low or whatever, do your research first to achieve that clarity. You know, if anyone is ever curious about that and reaches out to Max or myself, maybe we can organize of how to table work Shakespeare, how to get prepared to reach clarity, how to get more specific about the little bit of the phrasing that I spoke about. Because if that's what you need to do in order to let go and speak like yourself with your accent, if you're from Providence, Rhode Island, or wherever, that's a very bad Providence accent. Please don't judge me, locals. More of a bad Boston. But you know
Right.
what I mean? Like it's okay, especially if you're just auditioning for school, for you to speak like you rather than try to do something else and and hurt your chances of being clear. It's more important for you to be you and be clear. It's more important for me to know what you're saying with each line and for me to follow you than for me to be like, ooh, you lost me. Because I'm actually of the field that no matter how complicated a Shakespearean line might be or how old the word might be, if you are really clear about what you're saying and the line and what your intention is and how you want to make the other person feel with your text, then they'll understand it, even if they don't know the word. even if they might not understand the definition of a specific word. So be kind to yourself, chill out, but also do the work necessary depending on where your comfort level is, so you can let go, so you can feel free to fail. Because oftentimes that's the most interesting, that's the most compelling, and most importantly, that's what gets the story across most efficiently.
Yeah. And so if that's interesting to you guys, if that sounds like something that you're interested in doing with Marcel, drop it in the comments, and we'll get something together. Maybe I think we're all going to have a lot of free time on our hands over the summer, so why
Yeah,
not?
please. And just know that the next workshop can be me just silent and just asking you all some questions and working. Whoever wants to work on monologues or stuff, this could be a space for that as well.
That's cool. I did let you mentioned something. We'll end in a second. You did put something popped into my head. You were like, it's a bad Southern Boston accent, and all I imagined was like Mayor Menino, the old mayor of Boston, like doing Julius Caesar, and I'm like, I just that's the only thing that's in my head right now, and so we gotta get out of here before this comes out. So
Right.
so this was awesome, Marcel. Thank you so much for doing this tonight.
Thank you.
This was a lot of fun. And hopefully we can do this again soon. And you're in Miami right now, right? For
I'm in
everyone.
Miami, and if I can, I'll be back in Providence May 1st.
Cool,
If possible.
awesome.
I'm quarantining for another 2 weeks there because of that, or for however long.
All right. So everyone who joined us tonight and is watching, thank you for tuning in and hopefully having a little bit of fun with us. Marcel, thank you for doing this. This was awesome.
That's what chilled me out. I was a little anxious in the beginning, which is ironic given our title, but
Yeah, well, I think stage fright's a thing, and
right.
and everyone needs to breathe. I think you mentioned a couple times about just like breathing, and
Yeah,
just
breathing.
getting and just staying in touch, talking, letting the audience be your brain cells.
Right.
That's important.
Right.
All right, so that'll do it for us tonight. Thanks, y'all. Thank you for tuning in.
Yes. And if anyone has further questions, you know where to reach me on Facebook. And thank you.
Awesome. Take care, y'all. Stay safe. Wash your damn hands. And